December 23, 1944, Phoenix, Arizona. The desert is silent under a cold moon. 25 German prisoners crawl through a tunnel they've spent months digging. They whisper to each other in the darkness. Freedom is just a few feet away. One by one, they emerge from the earth. They take their first breath of open air in years. Ahead of them lies the Salt River, their way to Mexico, their way home. They hoist their collapsible boat, built in secret beneath their barracks. They start running. And then they stop. There is no river, only sand. The maps they used were 50 years out of date. The Salt River was dry. This is the story of America's greatest prisoner escape. A story of determination, irony, and the strange humanity that can bloom even in war. This is the Great Papago Escape. Most people don't know this, but during World War II, more than 425,000 German prisoners of war were held in camps across the United States. They lived in quiet corners of Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Arizona, far from the front lines, far from home. The camps were designed not just to hold men, but to keep the war far away from the American public. Barbed wire, watchtowers, and yet, compared to the horrors of Europe, life here was almost humane. At Camp Papago Park near Phoenix, life was strange, almost surreal. The camp was once a resort area, sunny skies, desert hills, and palm trees. Now it held over 3,000 German prisoners. Most were Navy men, U-boat sailors, veterans of the Battle of the Atlantic. They were men trained for survival, men who had faced freezing seas and depth charges, men who refused to simply wait out the war. Life inside the camp was organized and surprisingly calm. Prisoners played soccer on dusty fields. They built model ships from scrap wood. They were allowed letters from home, Red Cross packages, and even small wages for work. The Geneva Convention required fair treatment, and America followed it carefully.
But discipline, skill, and pride don't disappear just because a man is captured. And soon, a group of restless officers began planning something bold. Their leader was Captain Jürgen Wattenberg, a decorated U-boat commander who had been captured in the Caribbean 2 years earlier. To him, escape was not about hope, it was duty. It was the final act of defiance. Wattenberg gathered his most trusted men, engineers, sailors, and officers. Together, they began planning an escape no one thought possible. The plan started small. One of the prisoners found an unused storage room beneath the camp workshop. It became the entrance to a tunnel. From there, the men would dig 200 feet under the fences, emerging beyond the guard patrols. The work was slow and dangerous. Every night, they dug for hours, scraping away clay soil with spoons, tin cans, and makeshift shovels. They used wooden boards to keep the tunnel from collapsing. They worked by candlelight, breathing stale air and silence. Every ounce of dirt they dug had to disappear. So they hid it inside walls, under floorboards, and dumped it quietly under the volleyball court. For months, guards never noticed. The tunnel grew, 1 foot, then 5, then 50. By winter, it stretched 178 feet, wide enough for a man to crawl through, deep enough to vanish from the world above. But digging a tunnel wasn't enough. They needed a plan once they got out. Wattenberg's idea was daring: to reach Mexico by water. The nearby Salt River, according to their maps, flowed into the Gila River, then into the Colorado, and finally into the Gulf of California. From there, they could sail home. It was insane. But in war, insanity often looks like courage. In secret, they began building a boat. Not just any boat, a collapsible wooden craft that could be hidden in parts. They used scavenged wood, tar paper, and stolen nails. They even crafted paddles and waterproofed the seams with grease. The craftsmanship was astonishing. Every piece fit together perfectly. Even the guards were impressed, though they had no idea what it was for. By late December, the plan was ready. The tunnel was finished, the escape route drawn, the boat complete. They waited for the right night, cold, clear, with a full moon to light their path. December 23rd, 1944, the night of freedom. At 8 p.m., the first man crawled into the tunnel, then another, then another. For an hour, they inched through the dark passage, their breath echoing off clay walls. One man whispered, "If this tunnel collapses, the war ends for us right here." But it didn't. They reached the other side, just outside the camp's fence line. They emerged from the earth like ghosts, covered in dirt, eyes wide with disbelief. Freedom. Real freedom. 25 men in total, all officers, all veterans of the German Navy. They carried food, compasses, and the disassembled parts of their collapsible boat. They could almost hear the sound of running water ahead. The Salt River, their lifeline to Mexico. They hoisted the boat and started marching toward it. After 15 minutes, they stopped. What they saw didn't make sense. The riverbed was empty, cracked, dry as bone. The maps they had used were from the 1880s, before dams and irrigation projects had changed Arizona forever. The Salt River was no longer a river. It was a desert within a desert. They stood in silence. 25 men, a useless boat, and miles of sand. Despite the failure, they didn't give up. They broke into smaller groups, hoping to reach Mexico on foot. They carried rations, canteens, and a fading sense of direction. But the Arizona desert has no mercy. Freezing nights, scorching days, no shade, no water. Some wandered toward Phoenix, believing they could find a car or a train. Others simply kept walking south. Within hours, the escape was falling apart. One man, delirious and sunburned, reached a small gas station near Phoenix. The old attendant behind the counter looked at him, puzzled. The stranger's uniform, the accent, it was clear he didn't belong. "Water," the man croaked. The attendant gave him a glass. Then he called the police. When they arrived, the prisoner simply said, "Thank you, I am finished." Another officer was caught downtown, sitting quietly on a curb. A street cleaner heard him speaking German to himself. He offered the man a cigarette and then alerted the authorities. Within 10 days, every single escapee was captured. Not one made it to Mexico. Not one shot was fired. The guards were astonished, not by the escape, but by how far the prisoners had gone, mentally, physically, and creatively, to reach freedom. Instead of punishment by violence, the Americans followed the rules. Each man received a sentence of bread and water equal to the number of days he had been free. 3 days of freedom meant 3 days of bread. It became a headline across the United States. Newspapers called it the Great Papago Escape. Cartoonists drew German soldiers in rowboats paddling across sand dunes. Even the guards laughed. It was the kind of story that, in a world torn apart by war, reminded people that irony still existed. Months later, the war in Europe ended. Some of the same prisoners who dug that tunnel heard the news over American radios. Some cried. Some simply stared at the ground. Their country was gone. Their families scattered. But something unexpected had changed them. In the camps, they had seen a different kind of America, one that treated its enemies with dignity. They had worked alongside American farmers, eaten American food, listened to American music. And years later, many of those same prisoners would return, not as captives, but as immigrants. They came back to Texas, to Arizona, to the same land where they had once been behind barbed wire. They found jobs as mechanics, farmers, and builders. They raised families. Their children grew up American. Even some of the Papago escapees returned legally. One of them opened a small business in Phoenix, not far from the place where he had been captured. The irony was complete. Today, almost nothing remains of Camp Papago Park. The barracks are gone. The watchtowers are gone. But if you walk through the desert east of Phoenix, you can still find faint traces of the tunnel, a depression in the earth, a scar from a forgotten story. Every year, historians and families visit the site. They bring old photographs, young men in German uniforms, smiling beside American guards, men who were supposed to hate each other, but learned, somehow, to coexist. One former guard once said, "They came as enemies. They left as men we could respect." Another prisoner wrote in his diary, "The Americans are not as our leaders told us. They are firm but fair. They do not hate us. They simply won." The Great Papago Escape was a failure in the practical sense. But in the human sense, it revealed something extraordinary. It showed that even in war, human beings will risk everything for a taste of freedom. It showed that the line between enemy and friend is thinner than we think. And it showed, perhaps most powerfully, that compassion can be a weapon too, one that breaks ideologies without firing a single bullet. When the prisoners told their families back in Germany about what they had seen in America, the food, the kindness, the fairness, many were not believed. It didn't fit the propaganda. It didn't fit the story of American barbarism they had been told. But the truth was simple. In the desert of Arizona, among barbed wire and sand, they found something they didn't expect: humanity. One of the men who dug that tunnel wrote a final letter before being sent home. In it, he said, "We escaped the camp, but we never escaped America. It stayed with us, its vastness, its decency, its strange kindness. We came as enemies. We left as something else." The Great Papago Escape is remembered as the largest prisoner escape on American soil. But what truly makes it remarkable is not how far they dug or how long they were free. It's that in failing to escape, they discovered what freedom really meant. This has been Frontlines Unfolded. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more untold histories of courage, irony, and humanity from the front lines of World War II. Because sometimes the smallest stories revealed the biggest truths.